Hi guys, good morning, it's me. And I've got some stuff to show off, so let's get into battle here. Oh, I didn't mean to do that, but battle should still work fine. It does. And most of what I've got to show can be shown through the new Disarm command that I have here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use that on the Coral Guard. You can see with the attribute icons I reverted back to the previous idea, and I added a bunch of icons just to fill up the space. So you'll see that that'll be a problem in a moment. And go ahead, see a cool little animation, and then I hit for 0 damage. A lot of things still hit for 0 damage, but you'll see that now there's this glowing X that's around his arm, which is pretty neat. I'm gonna do the same to this imp here. Neat, now he's also got an X around his weapon wielding hand. So if you put the pieces together, you can maybe guess as to what this arm does or what it's going to do. I'm going to attempt to use it on our third enemy in the project here, the souls. I'm going to do it. Still 0 damage, but you can see that it hasn't created an X because, well, the silly thing doesn't have any arms and it's not holding a weapon, so disarm's not going to work very well. So that's the bulk of the work that I did today. Enemies that are a part of the weapon wielding family, which are both of these, and distinctly not my soul's enemy here. I've added the first property that's actually influenced by one of the families that I had added in yesterday to the enemies. Like most of the calculations, Disarm doesn't actually do anything yet, but you can imagine that it'd probably be a penalty to damage for those who are wielding their weapon, or those who rely on weapons for an attack. Because of the positioning of the X as well, it means that on the enemies I load in, I have to provide another set of coordinates, which is basically where their weapon origin point is. So I've gone for basically the hilt of the sword and the arm of the little imp here. Same as what I did for the eyes. I don't remember if I mentioned this, but this little portrait that's here is simply the same sprite as these, but based on the eye coordinates, it cuts like a square around it, so that's automatically generated. Yeah, you'll also see that the damage numbers are like a bit funkier than they were before, a little bit thicker. What I've been thinking about is, and this ties into getting the enemy families to have uses, is having like a satisfying number effect for different things that happen. So the first what I was thinking of was having this bold color effect for, oh, I actually killed him. Flame actually does damage, I forgot about that. Oh, and his little X persists there, so I've missed a death check, but that's alright. Yeah, the thought behind the emboldening of the numbers, if like you hit a weak point of a family, so maybe Coral Guard's its collection of families causes it to be more susceptible to lightning damage. If you actually hit one of those weaknesses with a lightning spell, then the number will be, more satisfying. Maybe it will persist a bit longer. You can kind of see at this speed, because our game runs at such a low resolution, you can actually, its movement is very blocky as it goes up, so very low speeds as well as very subtle scaling of the numbers isn't really an option, because if I did subtle scaling, the numbers would get horribly torn and blocky and it would look very ugly. So I've got to put a bit of thought on how I'm gonna do number effects. I might use a larger font for the damage numbers, because I think having nice big juicy damage numbers is appropriate. So I'll very quickly go through the new additions I had to make to get the disarm status effect to have bias between enemies based on their alignments. So this happens in the enemy stats calculation, and this stuff is new. So both players and enemies have ailment resistances and elemental resistances for each of the types. Obviously they all default to 0, so there's no bias either way, and then there's also a corresponding multiplier, which I'll talk about later. So after they're all defaulted, for enemies I actually set the multiplier of disarm to 0, which means there is no way they can be affected by disarm, because whenever there's a chance calculation for applying the ailment disarm, the final step is to be multiplied by the corresponding multiplier of the list, and that's always going to start at 0. And the only way that is rectified so far is just after that we loot through all of the families that the enemy is a part of, and if we identify the family of weapon in the list, then we set that multiplier back to 1, which means it's fair game again. So that's on stat calculations. Whenever battle starts and we set off our stage with enemies, we calculate all the stats. As for the actual command, we create a damage object, which it's called a damage object, but it's basically just a sophisticated way of storing the source, the target, and the action being taken. And then there's other stuff like what element the action is, if it's attack or spell, stuff like that. So we create the damage, and then just before we apply the damage, we calculate if there's any ailments that correspond to the command that we're executing. So in here, I only have 2 applicable ailments. So the poison and berserk that I made before, they actually aren't obtainable in the game currently, because when a command is launched, only the command blind and the command disarm have entries in this switch statement. So for the command disarm, when we do that, we attempt to apply the ailment disarm. We pass in the damage object because that's got our source and target and all the other combat information that we might need. And then there's an actual application chance. So for blind, you can see it's 0.5, which means there will be a 50% chance that this is applied. Where disarm, currently it's guaranteed at the base level, but when we actually attempt to apply the ailment, you can see there's a few calculations that go here before we do a final 1 to 100 dice roll, and if that's successful, then we finally apply it. We finally applied the ailment to the target. Easy peasy. And this case would never be satisfied regardless of how high the base chance is if the target's ailment multiplier is set to 0, as I demonstrated before, because that's the last multiplication. Whew. So that's how that works. So I'm still working on stuff trying to make the battles a little bit interesting. You can see I added the 3rd enemy, the soul. Adding enemies is quite easy right now. There's no AI attached to any enemies yet, so in battle all they do is pick a random player target and they use attack. That's all they can do right now. So that might be something I touch on soon, but I'm trying to get all of the ailments, all of the interesting combat stuff working. I'll have to get the numbers fixed soon so the stats calculate properly, and the gear equipped, the gear you equipped is relevant and the enemy stats are relevant. After that, throw in a bunch of enemies and then try and make a few levels with some different encounter groups, and just doing things day by day. So thanks for watching, and tune in 2 days for another update of SJFS. Thanks guys, peace.